Good afternoon. Welcome, students, faculty, staff, honored guests, and members of the Wabash community to the 45th LaFollette Lecture. This lecture is named in honor of Charles D. LaFollette, a 1920 graduate of the college. Leif, as he was called by his friends, came to Wabash from the township of Thorntown in 1916. His interests and pursuits as a student both reflected and presaged his deep engagement with the humanities and the arts. He was managing editor of The Bachelor, student director of the Glee Club, and a leader in the Dramatic Club, a forerunner of today's Scarlet Mask. After earning his A.B. as well as a master's from Wabash, Leif headed to Harvard for an MBA. He stayed on there as a researcher and soon became an administrator. Not long afterwards, Leif undertook a distinguished career with Corning Glass Works and the Dow Corning Corporation, rising over the decades from lowly sales rep to the boardroom as a director. Throughout his career, Wabash remained part of Leif's world. He served on the Board of Trustees between 1952 and 1977. And Leif and his wife, Ibby, gave back in other ways, such as endowing the Distinguished Professor of the Humanities. Not only a businessman, Leif reveled in arts and education, serving on the boards of the Corning Museum of Glass and helping to start the Corning Community College. Listen to his response in a 1977 interview to a question about his personal relationship to the arts. Well, I have long been extremely interested in 18th century England and books of the period. If I had to say what I enjoy most of the things I've been up to, I'd say studying Samuel Johnson. The response continues. Mr. LaFollette often owns 2 copies of the same book, one for collecting and another that he can mark up with pencil while reading. Then he starts quoting Johnson verbatim until he jokes about doing so to show off. What about other arts? The interviewer asks. Leif doesn't budge. Well, books first. But then, note how he defines Corning. Though small, it is interesting. Why? Education, museums, intellectual delights, and arts across all manner of genres and forms. These are what enlarge a place and open to its citizens new ways of being in and thinking about their world. If the fine arts and humanities together are Division II's charge, then what kind of humanity did Mr. LaFollette embody? One that was held up as a model by friends and colleagues of radically different stripes. Upon Leif's retirement as a trustee, English professor Bert Stern, a countercultural pot stirrer par excellence, penned a tribute in his honor. Its title, The Businessman as Poet. And noted libertarian economics professor Ben Rogie toasted Leif LaFollette with these words: "May those who teach and those who learn at this college and those who guide its destinies in the years ahead be forever mindful of your example, forever aware that the finest product of a liberal education is that rarest of creatures, a truly civilized human being." This lecture, established as an annual event by the Board of Trustees upon Mr. LaFollette's passing in 1982, honors Leif's lifelong commitment to liberal arts at Wabash and especially to the humanities. The LaFollette legacy continues. If we could bring up the house lights, Chris. I want to extend a very special welcome to Leif's son, Gary LaFollette, and to Leif's granddaughter, Linda LaFollette Foley. Gary has joined us for almost all of these lectures over the years. Thank you for continuing the story of your family here at Wabash. Events such as this one arise from a tradition of public lectures at places like Aspen and Chautauqua, where intellectuals are freed from the burden of making a watertight argument. Instead, lecturers ponder universal human experience, beauty, joy, suffering, wonder, the power of stories. In other words, the LaFollette Lecture, like a play, a music concert, or an art exhibit, engages both intellectually and aesthetically, both intriguing and delighting in equal measure, and more frequently raising questions than positing answers. In that spirit, there will be no formal question and answer period today, but instead, I hope that everyone will continue the conversation at a reception in the Ball Theater lobby and also on the Fine Arts Center porch immediately after the lecture. Go out and take a left and follow the hallway. There'll be appetizers and a cash bar. And so when the lecture continues, sorry for the didactic part here, and the applause has subsided, do not wait to be dismissed. Instead, please stand, chat with your teammates, and then join the reception down the hall. One last important note of business. A huge thanks to Julia Phipps for her work in pulling this event together, as well as to Chris Harshbarger and the IT staff for really going the extra mile in the last couple of days. Now, tradition dictates that last year's LaFollette Lecture introduces the current year's speaker. And so I now gladly invite Professor Crystal Benedicts to the stage.
Can you all hear me? All right. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce our 45th LaFollette lecturer, Michael Abbott, with his talk, The Last Mixtape. We know Michael in his various roles as a professor of theater, chair of the music department, devoted teacher, mentor, director, and actor. But his effect on our mutual imagination far exceeds any one of these. He directed about 30 plays at Wabash and composed the music for at least 5 of those. That's years of nighttime hours with his casts and his crews, years of building a series of ephemeral and curated worlds for our contemplation and joy. From the vivid choreographed exuberance of Something Rotten to the bold explorations of masculinity and sexuality in The History Boys and Take Me Out, to the profound questions about the nature of forgiveness in The Tempest. Michael's impressive list of dozens of publications and presentations include articles placed in niche academic journals like the Journal of Dramatic Theory and Criticism and Society for Cinema Studies Conference, as well as pop culture touchstones like Kill Screen Magazine and Slate. As this breadth suggests, Michael invents himself anew by following his intellectual and creative instincts. He is interested in computers, so he built the one he uses at home. He is interested in video games, so he created the Brainy Gamer, which in its day was the highest ranked single author website devoted to video games in the world. He is interested in film, so he became the first person to add a film studies class to the official Wabash curriculum. And I understand there was some debate. He is interested in music, and now he chairs that department. His life story unfolds similarly. He came to Wabash in 1981 as a first-generation college student from working-class Frankfort, Indiana, a teenager who made money over the breaks by working in Christmas tree factories. Then he went on to graduate from a highly competitive directing program at Columbia. He recounts that he was first seduced by what he calls the tawdry appeal of theater when he played trombone as a high schooler in the orchestra pit of his local Red Barn Theater, a theater that was in fact originally a cow barn. And tonight, he gives one of our most prestigious lectures in not a cow barn. When you speak with former students about Michael, you start hearing common threads about the importance of collaboration and the thrill of being taken seriously, about the coexistence of hard work and pleasure. Logan Wheelbaker, who graduated just a few months ago, recounts Michael telling his freshman tutorial class, "Guys, this is my first time teaching this subject. We're going to figure it out together." Logan said that act of invitation and collaboration from a real professor gave him an invitation to college as it should be. Quinn Cavan, class of 2019, also recalls one of Michael's acts of faith in his students. Michael encouraged him to apply for an arts program in New York City, a program that changed the course of his life and led to his career as a filmmaker. Quinn says, quote, "What I carry with me the most is the experience of being seen before I saw myself." Going back even earlier, Marcus Doshi, class of 1997, had plans to be a neurosurgeon, but then he became an actor in one of Michael's plays and ended up studying drama at Yale. He recalls Michael in rehearsals giving his actors an extraordinary invitation. "I don't know, try it. Let's see what happens." It isn't only students who praise Michael's intuitive vision. Wabash Professor of Theater Emeritus Dwight Watson, one of Michael's earliest mentors, told me that he had a hard time imagining Michael in the role of tonight's speaker because he associates Michael with leaps, not lectures. Dwight recounts one of Michael's less conventional ideas. Quote, "When Michael first mentioned to me that he was going to teach a freshman tutorial in which playing video games would be central to the course, I thought the theater department might be doomed." Instead, the course was predictive and far-sighted. It was a leap. Dwight describes Michael's leaps as, quote, "not in any way awkward. They're smooth, masterful, and complete." Many of us who have sat in meetings with Michael recognize this quality in him. He is calm, centered, able to sift the diamonds from the dross. He is willing to take intellectual and artistic risks when he sees their potential. Rhetoric professor and Michael's spouse, Jen Abbott, describes this as a North Star quality. His vision is honed to his priorities. We know he takes us and himself seriously. He is a son of Wabash who is clear-sighted about helping his alma mater evolve. Michael's story is a Wabash one. He was a student here, then a professor here. He met his wife in this building here. They were married in the chapel. You've seen their daughter on the stage of Ball Theater. And now, please join me in welcoming to this stage, for one night only, our 45th LaFollette Lecturer, Michael Abbott.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Crystal, I can't thank you enough for that lovely introduction. And I also know how much time it takes to prepare those things, so thank you. As you were talking, I was thinking, man, I'd like to meet that guy. Also, thank you, Jeremy, for inviting me to do this. I'm greatly honored that he asked me, and I'm delighted that I can represent my departments here today. Also, I just want to echo something that Jeremy said earlier about the Herculean effort of our AV team here that really almost literally last minute made this happen today with a projector that just wasn't functional earlier. So thank you to all of you guys who did that. Most of all, I want to thank Jennifer and Zoe, who countless times triaged my moderate to severe case of hand-wringing preparing for this lecture. So, when you are invited to deliver the LaFollette Lecture, you find out about a year ahead. So the great thing about that is, you have a lot of time to think about it. The downside is that you have so much time to think about it. I've been spending a lot of that time thinking about music. And I've brought some with me today, curated. You've been listening to a few tracks as you came in. Some years ago, Jennifer taught me these are called artifacts. So I'll be looking carefully at artifacts to explore how they're built and what they mean. She taught me that is called unpacking. So buckle in, because I'm going to be unpacking artifacts like crazy. She loves it when I talk like that. So, I've been teaching theater and film for 37 years, 32 of those here at Wabash. So today, of course, I'm going to talk about neither one. And you may fairly wonder why. Because for as long as I can remember, music has been my friend. When I was lonely, it kept me company. When I was confused, it gave shape to feelings that I couldn't name, sung in the voice of someone who'd already been there, who knew. In my darkest times, it comforted me. It was the one friend that never moved away, never grew tired of me, never let me down. Music is the one thing my father gave me that I'm grateful for. Now, I have loved staging plays, and I've loved teaching film. Truly, what a blessing that this college let me do those things with tons of support, very little interference, but music was my first love. It feeds my soul. Maybe you understand. Now, here's the wild part. For the last going on 5 years, right outside those doors, the college has actually paid me money to set up shop in the music department. It's like going to your old high school reunion and running into your first real girlfriend. And you're gray and you're 40 years older and you're worse for the wear and you got the bifocals, but she looks exactly the same. And she leans into you and says, hey, you want to pick up where we left off? And you say, yes, I do. So in the real life analog of this story, the role of the girlfriend was played by Todd McDormand. I just like the picture of that. But music isn't my real focus today. I'm more interested in love and vulnerability and how you can't have one without the other, and how music so often shows us that, or reminds us, makes us feel it literally, vibrating tiny bones in our ears, the humanities mingling with physics. So let's get to it. I cried when Brian Wilson died in June. He always felt like a kindred spirit. His song, In My Room, said everything I knew about creating your own safe space as a kid. Awkward, unsure, living under the shadow of an angry father. And when you look through Wilson's catalog, you find it everywhere. Loneliness, alienation, the ache of not belonging. What made him extraordinary was how openly he carried that into his music. That openness was the source of his genius, but also the wound that never healed. The day Brian died, I made a playlist of my favorite songs, and I played them through the house. When Zoe came home, she sat and listened with me. Later, we queued it up in the car on our way to somewhere. So on the night he died, it struck me, without thinking, that I had reached for an old habit of the heart, It was a kind of self-soothing, but it was also a way to build a story out of what felt like a loss. I had made a mixtape, and it helped. Since then, I've been thinking about what it means to live and to teach with a mixtape mind. When we share what we love, how we put ourselves at risk. But it's such a hopeful gesture. Do you remember? When she hears this one song, right after the one I put before it, she will finally understand me. It's vulnerable work saying, here, I love this. Here's what moves me. Judge my heart. But a mixtape was never a pile of songs. It was a channel of communication. You made one when words weren't enough, when you needed music to say who you were or how you felt about someone. It was also a way of shaping memory, the act of choosing and ordering songs, rewinding, dubbing, listening back. It turns loose tracks into a story. And unlike a digital playlist now, a mixtape had friction, time limits, hiss, the possibility of messing up the pause button. It required attention and effort. That's part of why it felt personal. You invested labor into the gift. So for the past 10 years or so at Wabash, I've boiled my teaching down to two things that I want my students to learn: how to see and how to love. Just those two. How to stop, just stop, and really look or really listen. How to find words for the love that's already in them. Words chosen with care. It takes a vulnerability that they've rarely tapped and a vocabulary that they don't yet have. My job is to make space for the one and give them tools for the other. And of course, that's our work, isn't it? The humanities in action, disciplines that teach us not just to analyze, but to feel, to give shape to experience, to practice loving in a way that requires our soft selves. So I'm here today to model that practice, putting myself out there, hoping you won't laugh in the wrong places, hoping music will help me find the words, hoping you'll understand me better, and maybe carry away something that I most want to give you. Just like a mixtape. This is my mixtape. So drop the needle on a Beach Boys song, and what you hear at first is sunshine, surfboards, cars, endless summer. But beneath it all stood a young man in Hawthorne, California, who didn't know how to surf, who was deaf in one ear from a blow delivered by his father. Brian Wilson could hear harmonies the way others see color, fusing doo-wop and jazz, weaving them into something popular music had never known. The Beach Boys began with beach anthems, but Wilson's restlessness drove them past novelty into songs like Don't Worry Baby and The Warmth of the Sun, each song more tender, more intricate, until 1966, when he delivered Pet Sounds, arguably the greatest pop album ever made. Suddenly, pop was orchestral, oddly textured, intimate. Brian was the first popular musician to turn the studio itself into an instrument. Fans were confused, the record label freaked out, but the Beatles, they went straight to Sgt. Pepper. A key part of Brian's genius was how he used the band's voices like a composer choosing instruments. Brian routinely gave his best melodies away, assigning them to the voice that was best serving the song. His brother Carl sang lead on God Only Knows, probably Brian's most beautiful song. Carl also sang lead on Good Vibrations, Brian's most complex song. Of course, Mike Love was the voice of the sun-drenched hits Surfin' Safari, I Get Around, California Girls. But Brian saved the most vulnerable and introspective songs for himself. In My Room, Don't Worry Baby, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. The contrast in those titles tells the whole story. An early glimpse of this inner world is tucked onto an album, Surfin' USA, from 1963. A song that most people skipped right past. No surfboards, no cars, no girls, just a lonely sea. Maybe you think you know the Beach Boys sound, but maybe not. This is Brian writing in C major and somehow making it sound fragile and mournful. So why does this song ache the way it does? And by the way, what a beautiful voice he had. If you look at the song chart, you can see that it's full of chords that don't belong in the key of C major. In fact, it contains more non-diatonic chords and that just means chords that don't belong in the key, than diatonic ones. Brian's genius was to take the brightness of the C major and shade it with darker tones of its parallel minor. It's not a key change, it's a mood change, a color shift. We think we're in a surf ballad, but the harmony keeps slipping into the shadows. A major key haunted by its minor twin. All of the chords you can see down the center of that chord chart, almost all of those chords don't belong in this key. Now, to add more texture, he has the bass and the percussion play in triplets, giving the song this swaying 6/4 feel, this dun 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 dun, instead of a strict 4/4 kind of march. And the tempo is very slow. I think this is the slowest song Brian wrote, 66 beats per minute. Interestingly, it's just about exactly the tempo of the human heart at rest. It's a Beach Boys record, but it's a pure Brian Wilson song. It's a precursor of the magnificent orchestral pop that he would soon create. Now, he enhances this feeling with a few other master strokes. He sustains his melody notes while the chords change underneath. Did you hear that? He holds a note while the chords change in this little descending arc underneath him. So what you find there is that 6/4 rhythm for me, it sustains him like he's floating on water. Like the 6/4 beneath him just kind of sustains him as he floats above the top, gently rocking him like the tide. Now, to appreciate how radical this was, you have to remember what pop music sounded like in 1963. You had teen idols like Frankie Avalon and even good songwriters like Smokey Robinson, but their sad ballads, often maudlin, were built on predictable musical foundations. A song like Blue Velvet, it's haunting, but it's 3 chords dressed up. Brian was using an entirely different language, and he was just getting started. The only pop artists operating at this level at that time were the Beatles. You can hear the same kind of painful, mature introspection in Paul McCartney's For No One, a perfect chamber piece about the quiet end of love. And in her eyes, you see nothing. No pleading, no drama, just painful inevitability, like in Brian's song. But that song was released on Revolver in 1966. Brian Wilson was already in that space 3 years earlier. By the time he got to Pet Sounds, Brian was doing things no one else was doing. Listen to this clip from Good Vibrations and see if you can track all the sounds that Brian recorded. You're hearing a theremin, a cello, a harpsichord, a jaw harp, a tambourine, sleigh bells, maracas, a Hammond organ, a purposely out-of-tune tack piano, which he hand-untuned himself, and layer upon layer of vocal harmonies and what are listed on the album as ad hoc sounds. At this point in his career, Brian Wilson starts treating the recording studio like a laboratory. For him, technology wasn't there just to erase mistakes. It became the palette that he used to construct his intricate soundscapes. Whole worlds of longing, of joy, fragile and immense. And that move, turning knobs and tape reels into extensions of himself, it points to something bigger. For Brian, technology wasn't neutral. It was expressive, even confessional. Every splice and overdub was a way of wrestling with the gap between the inner room where he felt safe and the outer world where he never did. It's why his music hurts the way it does, because you can hear both rooms at once. Brian's music keeps circling that tension, the private ache versus the public mask. Few artists in popular music have borne it more vulnerably, more honestly, or more painfully than Brian Wilson. Now, growing up in the 70s, I was bound to be drawn to the remarkable singer-songwriters of that era: Paul Simon, Carole King, James Taylor, Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon. I had all their records. But everything, and I mean everything, changed for me when two knuckleheads in black suits and ties appeared on Saturday Night Live. So, on the surface, the Blues Brothers look like a joke stretched too far. The sunglasses, the deadpan delivery, the cartoon car chases. But the key was they played it straight. Belushi and Aykroyd didn't wink at the camera in this movie. They put on those suits like they were punching a clock for work. The reverence was real. It came from Aykroyd. He grew up in Ottawa with a deep obsession listening to late-night radio, blues, and R&B stations coming out of Chicago and Detroit. He was the one stockpiling the Muddy Waters and the Howlin' Wolf records. Belushi wasn't a blues fan at first. He was all about the Who, Zeppelin, hard rock. But one night, he wandered into the speakeasy that Aykroyd ran with his SNL money in New York. He heard the records, and he heard the jams, and he got hooked. That's the real beginning. Not a comedy bit, but one friend converting another. Within 2 years, they had a #1 platinum record and a hit movie. They surrounded themselves with a band of killer players: Steve Cropper, Duck Dunn, Matt Guitar Murphy. And then, the genius move, they brought in the legends themselves: Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, James Brown, John Lee Hooker, Cab Calloway. For me, and a lot of kids, that's exactly how it worked. Comedy got us in the door, but their real achievement was smuggling soul and blues into the ears of a generation that might never have gone looking. The Blues Brothers weren't a parody, they were a conduit. They put the canon of Black American music on a big screen, and they made suburban kids stop laughing long enough to really listen. Just stop and listen. The Blues Brothers themselves, they were fun, but they were a gateway. The film's radical move was to simply stop and let the music play. The plot of the movie steps aside for a dozen full-scale musical numbers, a dozen, which take up a third of the film's runtime. James Brown gets a full 6-minute gospel fury sequence. Aretha stops the film cold with Think. John Lee Hooker performs on Maxwell Street, and the scene's shot like a documentary. These are complete numbers from beginning to end. Most comedies would chop those down to fragments. This movie said, no, stop, listen. It's worth remembering that Aykroyd, who co-wrote the screenplay, saw the movie as a musical from day one. Let me show you what I mean. In the gospel sequence, Jake and Elwood step into the fictional Triple Rock Baptist Church, and the narrative simply stops. James Brown, as the Reverend Cleophas James, takes the pulpit. Now, the choir behind him is the legendary Reverend James Cleveland Choir. And the man himself, James Cleveland, is a pivotal figure in American music. He was the music director at the Detroit church where Aretha Franklin grew up, where her father was the minister. And James Cleveland did two things that changed music forever. He taught Aretha how to play the piano, and he taught Aretha how to sing. I will come back to her. That performance occupies 6 minutes of the film. That's an eternity for a comedy. Even an actual musical like West Side Story doesn't have a number that long. And the moment isn't parody, it's revelation. The movie pauses to let a black gospel service explode at full tilt. You can hear it all in the mix, the call and response choir, the driving hand claps, the Hammond organ, the walking electric bass, and the choreography by Carlton Johnson contains callbacks to ecstatic dancing in black churches, the shout, the praise break. It is a film of reverence in so many ways. The film treats this music as the wellspring of soul and R&B. It gave Jake and Elwood their mission from God, but it gave a 17-year-old kid from Indiana a whole new musical roadmap. I can testify. My sister Laura is sitting right here. Laura, my best friend Mike Fry and I, did we or did we not dress up like Jake and Elwood and drive around town blasting soul music from a loudspeaker attached to my Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme? Did we or did we not? We did. This crazy movie changed my life. So, that preacher with the hair in the Blues Brothers, my first stop after the movie was to learn about that sweaty force of nature called James Brown. Everybody awake now? On this track, Brown's voice is pure percussion, right? He's not really singing in a melodic sense. He's riding the pocket. He's chopping up syllables. He's dropping grunts like rim shots. To hear how he builds the groove, you have to listen to the layers. The drums lock into a steady syncopated funk beat. The bass lays down a simple riff. The rhythm guitar plays this staccato scratch, and the horns fire off these stabs that answer his vocal cues. It's like a call and response between him and the horn section. Now, each part is a piece of a rhythmic jigsaw, and they all point back to the first beat of the bar. It's what musicians call the one. For James Brown, it's all about the one. And he does that for like 4.5 minutes. Now, James Brown's great leap was that he realized that you could park a whole song on one chord and still make it combustible, but only if every single instrument in the band, including his own voice, is basically a drum. Now, I have to be honest, James Brown was kind of scary to me. As a small-town kid, I didn't understand the world he came from. His intensity, his absolute command, it was a long way from the singer-songwriters that I was used to. My mother hated him. I think a lot of white America at that time felt the same. He wasn't just making music. He was projecting a kind of power, an unfiltered black identity that was intimidating to people who weren't ready for it. His music felt like a different language. And I couldn't understand his rendering of love because it wasn't soft. It was proud, it was defiant, and it was of a people. I couldn't fully access it, but his music, man, I loved it. Now, of course, soul music isn't only about the dance floor. Around the time of my soul conversion, I made a consequential decision. I stopped watching American Bandstand, and I started watching Soul Train. I remember seeing Marvin Gaye on that show not long before he tragically died. And the way the audience and the host, Don Cornelius, treated him, it was like he was a god. I started digging through his catalog, and I found this. So instead of James Brown's explosive funk, Marvin Gaye's inner city blues begins sparely. Piano chords, a pulsing kick drum, syncopated congas. Then 30 seconds in, Marvin's secret weapon emerges, the bass line from the Funk Brothers. Now, the Funk Brothers were Motown's house band, the invisible engine behind that sound. From 1959 through the early 70s, they played on more hits than the Beatles, the Stones, and Elvis combined. When that bass jumps in, it isn't background support, it's another voice. In fact, if you listen carefully, you'll hear that it's double-tracked, with two bass lines recorded separately and then mixed together. Not even McCartney was doing that. It's melodic and it's restless. It tightens the song into a hypnotic loop. I'll demonstrate it for you. I'm going to play you the first and the second and then the weaved together third that actually appears on the record. If you want a master class on R&B bass playing, listen to this whole album with headphones on. This is the foundation over which Marvin works. Where James Brown pushes outward, Marvin Gaye pulls you in. His tone is weary and conversational, and he delivers outrage through silk. Even when the lyrics bristle with frustration, his voice never erupts. It floats upward in a falsetto that sounds both hopeless and hopeful at once. It's anguish without theatrics. And he stacks his own vocal tracks, singing with himself an octave apart. His chest voice is grounded on earth, and his falsetto reaches for the spirit. This technique gets to the very definition of the genre. Soul music was always about carrying the sacred fire of gospel into the secular world of pop and R&B. Marvin's phrasing is steeped in the church, but his lyrics are political and worldly. And that tension, the holy in the everyday, is the very essence of soul music. And it's why soul music is such a humanistic force. It documents lived history. It wrestles with politics and protest, and it insists that the Black experience is inseparable from the story of what it means to be human. That was Marvin Gaye's whole career, making that one statement. When you place these two artists side by side, you begin to see the vast emotional territory of soul music, the full spectrum of expression. On the one hand, James Brown sets fire to the stage, and on the other, Marvin Gaye lights a candle in the room. They both burn with their own truth, just at different temperatures. And if you stop and think about it, how is this guy not the love child of these two guys? That's another lecture. So, what if there was a singer who could live on both ends of that spectrum? Who could dig into that raw gospel plea, but also deliver that lush velvet? What if there was someone who could bring all of it together whenever she wanted, sometimes in the same song? I'm going to slow down a bit for Aretha. As my grandmother used to say, I'm going to love on her a little bit. I feel no need to justify this choice. When we ask about the great artists of the 20th century, we're not asking about record sales or chart positions. We're asking who carried the full weight of human experience in their art, who embodied both the private ache and the public cry. By that measure, Aretha Franklin stands at the center of the conversation. Her foundation was always gospel. The church is where she learned that musical truth isn't about perfection, it's about surrender. It's the willingness to give your entire self to the song. She carried that sacred fire into secular music, and as I've said, that definition, that fusion is the definition of soul music. Aretha was more than a singer. She was a cultural force. Respect became an anthem for both the civil rights and the women's liberation movements. She sang at Martin Luther King's funeral, at presidential inaugurations, carrying the voice of a people in moments of grief and joy and protest. For 5 decades, she remained vital, singing not just soul, but pop, gospel, even opera. The time she stepped in for a sick Luciano Pavarotti at the Grammys and sang Nessun Dorma on a moment's notice and brought down the house? Are you kidding me? Every singer who came after her was measured against her. Whitney, Adele, Alicia Keys, Beyonce. She is the trunk of the modern vocal tree, and they've all acknowledged her. If such things matter to you, she was the first woman ever inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and years later, Rolling Stone named her the greatest singer of all time. Not the greatest female singer, not the greatest soul singer, the greatest, period. Now, some musicians embody raw power and others restraint, but Aretha held both extremes within her. She moved between them with a grace that made her the axis around which all soul music turned. At her most volcanic, think Respect or Chain of Fools, she channeled a kind of James Brown urgency, the shouts, the cries. Her entire body becomes an instrument of sound. She didn't just sing notes, she hurled them, bent them, broke them wide open. You can feel the stomp and the sweat and the fear, the sheer physical force. When she wanted that raspy, husky voice, she could just summon it. Now, when you hear that, you might compare her to James Brown, who was all about pure eruption. But Aretha's power was different. Her fire was always forged into a deep musicality, a fusion of melody and rhythm that stood outside James Brown's grasp. But that's only half the story. She could just as easily dive into Marvin Gaye's world of quiet intensity. Think Daydreaming or Until You Come Back to Me. A couple of those were playing as you came in. Here her voice is a master class in breath, in space, in the power of what is not sung. Her quiet moments just shimmer. Proof that intimacy can carry just as much weight as catharsis. But the true magic, the singular genius of Aretha, was her ability to take this entire journey in the space of one song. We're going to listen to Ain't No Way, my favorite record that she ever made, written by her younger sister Carolyn, who you can hear singing backup on the recording. This is from a miracle of an album called Lady Soul. Before we dive into this music, I want to contextualize this moment in Aretha's career, because I think it's so encouraging for those of us who don't find our way for a while, or who have let others define our value. Aretha's success was nothing close to overnight. She spent 7 years at Columbia Records, cutting standards and pop songs that never fit. They simply did not know what to do with her. It wasn't until she moved to Atlantic Records, sat back down at the piano, and brought the church with her that everything clicked. And a year later came Lady Soul, the album that crowned her, featuring classics like Chain of Fools, Natural Woman, and of course, the legendary Muscle Shoals rhythm sections on it. That's a very young Dwayne Allman there on the right. The Sweet Inspirations are on it with Cissy Houston. Even a very young Eric Clapton sneaks in for a guitar solo on this album. And what a terrific pianist Aretha was. Her gospel touch driving the music forward. As you'll hear, her left hand lays down the foundation, while her right hand does the more intricate work, adding these beautiful bluesy fills that respond to her vocal lines. It's like she's talking with herself inside the song. So, this is the final track on that album, Ain't No Way. Ain't No Way begins in a hush. It's restrained and tender, like a confidential whisper. The band holds back, stays out of her way, responding in between the words, in between her piano riffs. The horns don't emerge until after she finishes the whole first verse, lifting her, responding to her plea as it intensifies. The bottom end of the horn section holding back even longer, just before she begins to belt. The verses build, her vibrato widens, the tension tightens, and the chorus erupts, Ain't No Way. It's a raw gospel cry, rasping with emotion. And pushing her even higher is that operatic background vocal from Cissy Houston, who of course gave birth to the most direct inheritor of Aretha's instrument, Whitney. Then comes the bridge, and Aretha unleashes her whole instrument. She unleashes everything she has, shouts, cries, pleads. Then just as powerfully, she recedes. The song doesn't end with a shout, but with a fragile, heartbroken whisper. In 3.5 minutes, she takes us from pleading restraint to righteous eruption, all the way back to humble resignation. And in that journey, she reveals the core truth of the song, that to truly love is to make yourself completely vulnerable. She's pleading for her love to let her in, to give her even some of the vulnerability that she's given him. For Aretha, expressing that truth was never about one mode or another. She didn't choose between the roar and the whisper because she didn't have to. She was both, a complete universe of feeling. That is why she's the Queen of Soul. And to tell these stories, she had what was perhaps the greatest instrument in the history of popular music, a voice of staggering range and technical command, nearly 4 octaves from a deep resonant chest voice to a supple floating falsetto. She could bend time, stretch a single syllable into a moment of profound thought, or lean so far behind the beat that the entire rhythm section just seems to orbit around her. And she's always behind the beat. In her voice, you can hear the whisper of Billie Holiday, the phrasing of Ella Fitzgerald, the testimony of Mahalia Jackson. No other singer carried so much history in their voice, and yet always sounded so transcendently, unmistakably herself. Now, 2 things should jump out. First, her incredible control of dynamics, the rise and fall of the volume. Second, how she shapes that volume, not just with her voice, but with her whole body. You can feel her leaning back from the mic for the big notes. At one point, she leans back in too soon, and she overloads the mic, causing it to clip. That little pop you hear, it's right here. She clips the mic. It's that sound. You're supposed to take that out. That's a mistake. But her voice is so fire. It's so in the middle of the song that they just obviously kept it in. Now, this raises a question. Why does this 57-year-old record feel more alive than so much music made today? It's not that music has gotten worse. I don't believe that. I don't think I believe that. I'm not sure. But it's worth noting that the #1 song of 1968 was the Beatles' Hey Jude, and the #2 song of the year, which you've already heard me play by mistake twice, which spent 5 consecutive weeks at the top of the charts, was this song. So that's an instrumental called Love is Blue by Paul Marriott, and it's awful. So the quality of music may or may not have changed. What I'm sure of is that the process of making records has fundamentally changed. Tools like compression and auto-tune are designed to smooth out the very human edges that made Aretha electric. So for contrast, here's a clip of another phenomenal vocalist, Lady Gaga, on Hold My Hand. Do you notice what's happening here? She starts out soft in the left part of the waveform. She's singing rather softly. And she ends big. She's belting at the end. But look at the waveform. It's a solid block. Compare it to Aretha's waveform. You see? That's what compression looks like. A compressor listens for the loudest parts of a performance and then turns them down, allowing an engineer to boost the overall volume of the track. So the distance between the loud and the soft gets squished. Now, compression isn't new. The Beatles used it. What's new is how aggressively it's used across the entire mix. The reason is that services like Spotify normalize every track to a standard volume. So to preserve a bit of control in the recording process, the engineers squashed the music themselves, making it as loud as possible before Spotify's algorithm does it for them. And the result is music that's loud but flat. It loses that dynamic journey that you heard in Aretha's song. Now, this technical shift in music isn't just about audio engineering. It's a profound humanistic inquiry. It reveals how our tools don't just change our sound, they reshape our aesthetics, forcing us to ask what we truly value in art. Do we value polished perfection or the messy, imperfect sound of a human being pushed to their limits? But before we frame this as a simple battle between natural and artificial, we have to remember that our idea of authenticity has always been shaped by technology. If you listen closely to a Johnny Cash record from the late 60s, the poster boy for raw authenticity, you'll hear plenty of studio reverb and delay applied to his voice. The tools change, but the intervention is not new. Which brings me to a tool like Auto-Tune. Now, when I hear Auto-Tune, I hear the machine, the software smoothing out the cracks, pulling notes into perfect alignment, making a mediocre singer sound less mediocre. My students don't hear that. For them, that layer of mediation is invisible. What I experience as a manipulated performance, they receive as the performance. They hear a voice, not a processed voice, not an effect. They hear singing. The difference isn't a moral argument about right and wrong or a qualitative one. It's an aesthetic one. And that makes me wonder, what if their sense of authenticity isn't diminished by the machinery, but formed inside it? What if what I hear as distance, they hear as closeness? And tracking that shift is precisely what we're here for in the humanities. Not just to ask what we're hearing, but to ask what our hearing says about us. It's our job to notice these shifts and to ask what they reveal about us, and to wrestle with what we decide to call authentic, beautiful, human. Music gives us the perfect laboratory for that work. The waveform becomes a mirror. This is why I love to teach, and this is why to teach is to love. Listening to music this way isn't just about catching the software at work. It's about learning to notice each other, to hear what someone else hears, even when it isn't what I hear or what I like. It takes generosity. It takes a kind of softness. And in that space where we risk listening past our own assumptions, music becomes a way of practicing our humanity. And I will say, I spent some of my early years as a teacher damaging that relationship. We should be very careful telling students that they shouldn't love something because they're not yet educated enough to know why that song, that movie, that book actually sucks. It's the worst kind of arrogance, and we should shun it. Let them love what they love. Let them find their own way. I spent 30 years hating the Bee Gees because I was supposed to. What a waste. The Bee Gees are fabulous. So, as I turn to the last part of my talk, I'll pivot one last time, and it's a big pivot. We'll call this the bonus track at the end of the mixtape. The last part of my journey is where my love of music collided with my love of theater, the American musical. My first role ever was a small part in Annie Get Your Gun. From then on, I tried everything: acting, directing, composing, playing in the pit. So when I moved to New York for grad school, I thought I knew what musicals were. And I liked them. I didn't love them. They felt light. I didn't yet understand that living in that city, at the peak of his powers, was someone who would change all that for me, and for many of us who found musicals quaint. someone who remade my idea of what a musical could be, who it was for, and why, at its best, a musical is the highest form of theater. So when I moved to New York, I got there at just the right time. Sunday in the Park with George opened in May of 1984. By the time I was there a year later, it had won the Pulitzer Prize, but it was limping at the box office like many Sondheim shows did. But it was good news. For a broke grad student, Columbia had free day of show tickets when productions didn't sell out. Now, a bit of backstory. That summer, my stepfather died of cancer. I arrived at Columbia in poor spirits. I felt like an outsider, a complete outsider. The only student fresh out of undergrad, the only one with no professional credits. Classmates from Johannesburg, Beirut, Brooklyn, me, Frankfurt, Indiana. At Wabash, I'd been a big fish. In New York, I felt invisible. And I believed I had nothing to say, nothing that would matter to anyone there. Sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need, right when you need it. In early October, before it closed, I saw Sunday in the Park 3 nights in a row. Mandy Patinkin and Bernadette Peters were still there, and it was pure magic. Remember what I said about the Blues Brothers, how that blew my mind? Well, this did it again, but it was very different. The Blues Brothers was an awakening to a history that had always been there. I just had to find it. Sondheim was making that history in real time. From Sweeney Todd through Sunday in the Park and Into the Woods, he was pushing the American theater forward in a way that no one else was, and I was so there for it. But for me, it was more personal. Near the end of the show, the artist George, lost, disconnected, certain he has nothing left to say, is visited by the ghost of his great-grandmother. In a sublime moment of theatrical magic, Dot steps out of the painting, and together they sing "Move On." From the moment I heard it, tears streaming down my face, it became my anchor, and it has remained so to this day. In my lowest moments, it has reminded me that music, more than any other art form, can be a balm to the soul. Dot steps out of the 19th century and speaks to George across the gulf of time. And what does she tell him? She tells him to stop. Just stop and look. And look. And when he does, he begins to move forward. It's our work, isn't it? Bringing our students to that moment when art reaches past its own moment to steady us in ours, to offer meaning and comfort and guidance when we've lost our way. Brian Wilson does that. Aretha Franklin does that. Now, as I think about my life after this place, Sondheim's message is still a beacon. It's a reminder to move on. That art is exactly, that we make art exactly when there seems to be no path forward, or when we're at odds with the world we're living in. No one understood those struggles more than Sondheim. The alienation, the self-doubt. He grappled so hard with them. They run through all his musicals before Sunday in the Park. But in this show, in this song, at 54 years old, he found his way. So before I play us out with a great soul artist, Curtis Mayfield, it has been the privilege of my life to teach and to be taught here. I'm grateful for this chance to speak. What I've tried to share is that music does more than accompany us. It gives us a way to practice our humanity, to sharpen our seeing and to widen our hearing. And if our work endures, it is because we learn to notice each other with care and to love more deeply for it. So as my mixtape winds to its end, I hope you will make your own, finite, imperfect, with friction and hiss, stitched together with intention. May you risk sharing what moves you, because this is how we see each other, because this is how we love.